We're joined today by Superintendent Phil Healy from Coventry Police. We're here to talk about the issue of gangs and gangs culture in the city. So thank you for joining us, Phil.
Okay, thank you.
So can you give us a bit of a background to the situation in the city?
Yeah, well, I think we know already that sort of violence has a devastating effect, on impact around individuals and families and our local communities. West Midlands Police are there to support those families and actually do whatever we can to sort of reduce that sort of crime and the impact. I think overall violence nationally, we've seen an increase in violence nationally. Coventry has seen that increase nationally, and again further nationally in the West Midlands Police sort of arena.
So this team has been set up in Coventry. People think of gangs, they usually might think of Birmingham or Manchester or those sort of cities. Yeah. So how actually bad is the situation here? I
think nationally, I don't think the gang situation is any different, like I've already alluded to, any differently in Coventry and certainly in the West Midlands. On that basis, we have seen that increase in gang violence. And youth violence. Hence, we have got a dedicated team of a sergeant and 4 officers, specialist dedicated detective officers who are there to actually understand a bit more around the gang's issues and actually be that proactive arm in our response to actually incidents that are actually happening.
When people think of gangs, then often stereotypically just think of it's some using hoods with knives or that sort of thing. What generally do you find is sort of like the makeup of gangs in the city? Yeah,
well, some gangs are more complex than others, more sophisticated than others. We have a number of gangs within the city, and we know quite a bit about those gangs already. So, and the nature of those gangs are more explicit. I actually call them around the 3 R's. So around that sort of retribution, revenue and respect. The makeup of those are different for those particular gangs, and as we understand those gangs a little bit more, then our response to that gang activity is different. And it's not just a policing response. Here is a multi-agency response. So in the city, we work very well with our partners, the City Council and others, about how we can sort of disrupt those gangs. And where enforcement activity is and need to be done, we'll push the enforcement very heavily. However, we know that there's our young people in those gangs that we need to try and get out of that cycle of crime. So we're working with our education colleagues and our other partners to try and get those individuals out of the life cycle of crime.
So I understand a lot of gangs can often be intergenerational, that can often be the case.
Yes, we know through the work that we've done, over the several years around what the gangs that make up, and we know that is the intergenerational aspect of that. So we know if they're siblings within that group, if we don't get them out of that cycle, they're only going to go into that sort of gang arena.
Money is obviously a big aspect. You obviously mentioned there about obviously sort of revenue. Obviously, when arrests are made, it can often lead to obviously proceeds of crime act hearing, which can take obviously their money and their power away. Yeah. Is money a big aspect for members of gangs as well? Is it something you have to really keep an eye on? Yes,
it is one aspect, and that tends to be generally related to the sort of drugs, so that drug line, if you like, in terms of the money that brings in. So we're quite acutely aware of that. So we do that a lot of activity around the sort of the drugs aspect as well. When we actually disrupt and divert that, and we actually gain those money through that proceeds of crime, we're able to bring that money back into sort of policing and community activity going forward.
Obviously, you mentioned there about drugs and drug offences is a big part of gangs. So what other offences do you often find connected to gangs?
It's normally about the offensive weapons, so the violence in itself, so using violence for their gain, so either by the use of a firearm or knife. And where a knife we know is seen in about 40% of our robbery aspect of it. But also, if the young person has a knife on them, they're 30% more inclined to actually use that weapon. So we're doing a whole raft of stuff within schools around the knife crime, that one conversation, that the Police and Crime Commission, the Chief Constable has already mentioned about. So, and through our police foundation money is actually making sure we're doing that. Lots of activity in our local schools to try and get them away from the life cycle of crime, but also the impact of carrying a knife or violence has on them as an individual, but also the families and local communities that I've already alluded to.
In an ideal world, obviously there would never be any crime and things would all be perfect. Obviously, that's never going to be the case. No. But even with that in mind, what is the ultimate aim here in fighting
the ultimate aim is to reduce crime overall, and violence is one of those parts. We know it's impacted, which I've already said. So any single knife or any single weapon and firearm off the streets is one weapon and knife off the streets in terms that we're not going to speak to those families about. So the impact is there. So we will do, and I will do everything in my power, working with all agencies to ensure that actually people feel safe coming to Coventry, and actually we're trying to reduce the crime in Coventry and people can go about their normal business.